Made me laugh, and he joins us now. Senator, how are you?
Hey, Sean, I'm doing well. I don't think they're doing too well at the New York Times today.
Yeah, I think you called them the leaders there that wouldn't stand up to, quote, the woke children that apparently now run the publication's newsroom. I'm like, ouch.
Yeah. So, Sean, apparently it's a firing offense at the New York Times to run an op-ed by a conservative senator supported by 58% of Americans, because that's exactly what happened. Remember, after they published this op-ed last Wednesday, both the opinion page editor and the owner of the New York Times stated in public that they defended the decision. But as the woke child mob demanded heads on pikes, they immediately apologized and prostrated themselves in front of this child mob as if it were a struggle session in the Cultural Revolution. And ultimately, the opinion page editor was fired and his deputy was reassigned. As you say, they now have a far-left opinion editor who is putting trigger warnings on everything the New York Times runs.
Yeah, I mean, look, why is it everybody is offended by just having discussions today? I mean, it's to the point we can't even have real discussions because, we're worried about, apparently a generation of snowflakes, precious little feelings. Now, I live with hurt. If I lived in their world, well, all you need to do is go to any social media site and look for my name. And I guarantee you, Senator, it'll hurt my poor little feelings. But you know what? I'm glad I live in a country where people can say anything they want against Sean Hannity. Now, I do believe some of these publications have crossed lines and, it's a high bar. You got Sullivan versus the Times. You have to show malice and you have to go through discovery. It's a pain in the ass to sue. But that's the beauty of what Nicholas Sandmann is doing now to all of these papers that smeared, slandered, besmirched this poor young kid who didn't do anything wrong. And Lynn Wood is going to destroy all of them.
Yeah, Sean, I think what you're saying at the New York Times is the culture of the social justice classroom taken to one of the liberal elite's most revered institutions. For years, we've seen so-called trigger warnings or accusations of microaggression on college campuses, and many people disregarded it, the playthings of young kids and radical academics. But unfortunately, that culture is increasingly marching through some of the elite left's most revered institutions, and that has a real impact on our public debate in America when you can't even publish an op-ed that has 58% support among the American people and longstanding historic precedent. I worry about what it means for the spirit of free and open inquiry in our country.
All I want is, look, I know, for example, I hate every 2 years and 4 years this lie. And the lie is that if you're a conservative or a Republican, that you're racist, that you're sexist, that you're a misogynist, that you're a xenophobe, that you're a homophobe, Islamophobe, that you want dirty air and you want dirty water, and you want grandma and grandpa to die after living on dog food and cat food for years, and then you'll get an image of a conservative or a Republican or Paul Ryan or Kevin McCarthy or Donald Trump taking grandma in a wheelchair and throwing her over a cliff. They make those commercials every 2 and 4 years. And I resent it because I don't want anybody in a conservative movement that has anything to do with any type of racism or sexism or any of this garbage. I actually happen to be fairly libertarian. Leave us alone and tax us less and stay out of our way and let people be free. And I don't mind people say horrible things about me. I do when the press crosses lines and they lie. We should have better libel laws. But then again, it does say Congress shall make no law. So I really don't have a leg to stand on, do I?
Well, it is a very high bar. It should be for public officials who are engaged in this kind of public debate. But you have to actually have the debate to air the ideas. There was a time when liberals at a place like the New York Times would defend exactly what you're defending, Sean, the spirit of open and free inquiry. Now, they're not a government agency. They can choose to publish what they do and do not want. But once they publish something, they would stand by it. It is a real problem for that free and open debate in our society if certain opinions that are supported by a majority of Americans and have that kind of longstanding historic precedent are deemed too tough or too unorthodox for the far left-wing newsroom at the New York Times.
Well, we cannot live. I think of every generation, for example, and then I think back. For example, my daughter was born just a couple of weeks before 9/11. Now, does she know about 9/11? Yes. Did she live through 9/11? No. My grandparents came to this country with no money. All four of them from Ireland. They had $10 in their pocket. That's it. And they worked hard their whole life, gulping water, trying to survive the entire time. They had no safety net at the time. My grandparents grew up in the Depression. My mother and father grew up poor in the Depression. My father fought 4 years in the Pacific in World War II. He was in the Navy. And it's like, I've read a lot about it. I've researched a lot about it. Did I live through it? No. But my father, at one point in my life, I wasn't making anything like what I'm making today. And he's like, save it all. When I would come home at, 6 in the morning after tending bar all night and I was sleeping, he'd go into my pockets and he'd steal all my money. For himself, no, he put it away in a bank account. He goes, save your money, save your money, save your money. Beat it into my head, Senator. Now, because of his experiences. Now, my kids have not had to experience that. That's the point. We all stand on each other's shoulders, don't we? And it's like now we're going to let words offend us, but we lost 100 million human souls in the last century.
Yeah, Sean, that's exactly right. Americans are a very tough people, and we always have been. And we've been built over the years by people like your family, immigrants who came here with nothing in their pockets trying to make a better life and then stood up and defended America and defended freedom around the world from the forces of tyranny, whether it was fascism or communism. And we need that toughness in our society, and we can't let words offend us. That's why the old children's rhyme says, sticks and stones will break your bones, but words can never hurt you. And there's too many kids in the New York Times newsroom who are letting words, not offensive words, hurt them, not name-calling, but just simple arguments that have a sound legal basis and a clear historic precedent. And that ought to worry everyone who wants America to remain a prosperous and safe country, and yes, a tough people.
If it's words that's so offensive, maybe they ought to look in the mirror, because I see the lies that they have said about, let's say, our president for the last 3+ years. They even got Pulitzers for their phony stories on Russia. Now it's been exposed. None of it ever happened. None of it ever should have happened. Even Rod Rosenstein, knowing what I know now, we should have never had the FISA warrants. Knowing what I know now, Mueller never should have been appointed. And no, I've never seen any evidence at all whatsoever of any Trump-Russia collusion. Now, we did have Hillary-Russia collusion. That is, she paid for Russian disinformation. And that is the dirty Russian dossier that they never verified, but then used to get warrants on by lying that it was verified.
Yeah, and it was the New York Times, as much as anyone, who were fanning those flames of the Russia collusion hoax for more than 2 years. At a time, even when we knew anyone who could look with their own eyes at the evidence at hand in late 2016 and early 2017, that there was no evidence of that kind of collusion between the Trump campaign and Russian intelligence services. It was all an effort to delegitimize the president and his victory in 2016, and frankly, to disrupt the peaceful transition of power, one of the greatest political scandals in American history.
So on January 27th, remember, we first had the first case of coronavirus, December 30th, that we'd identified. The first one in America was January 21st. President 10 days later put in the travel ban, and then subsequent travel bans, and then the quarantine. We haven't had one of those in 50 years. 10 days after, first identified case of corona. Now, I had Dr. Fauci on February 27th. I had a group of doctors on February 28th. I talked about it with the president on February 2nd when I did the Super Bowl interview. I had Fauci back on February 10th. And I was asking all about asymptomatic people that might be shedding the virus and what we might or might not know about this virus and how dangerous it was. And that newspaper pretty much accused me twice now of being a murderer. And meanwhile, that newspaper, after the travel ban, who says it's not safe to travel to China? Now, Senator, if anybody read that piece of garbage in that toilet paper, because that's what it's worth, don't you think that that would have been really dangerous advice they gave people? Because I do.
Yes, Sean, incredibly dangerous. It would have meant many more cases much earlier in the United States before we were prepared to deal with them before we were, or even further away from the summer months when the virus has less chance of spreading. But I think it gets back to this same kind of cause at the New York Times, is you have these young, woke staffers who view anything Donald Trump does as necessarily bad, and anything that might cause offense to the Chinese Communist Party as somehow xenophobic or racist. I can tell you I was right in the middle of that debate in mid and late January about shutting down air travel from China and urged the president to do so, and against the advice of a lot of his senior advisors, to include public health advisors, he took the bold, the courageous, and the right stance to shut down travel quickly.
Listen, I think those decisions, more than any other ones, and nobody agreed with them. Incredible instincts, in my view, which I think, again, that's somebody that doesn't come from the swamp world. He's able to make those decisions. And, by the way, you'll never get credit for it, but the largest and fastest medical mobilization in the history of mankind saved countless lives, incalculable numbers of lives, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's no way to tell, but it just stands to reason, given what we've learned about this virus and what we saw, especially in New York City, about 6 weeks later from the president's decision, that if we hadn't shut down travel from China, if we still had 22,000 persons landing in the United States from mainland China every single day in February, that our case numbers and ultimately the number of Americans who have died from this virus would have been orders of magnitude higher than it is now.
Well, keep up the fight, Senator. We do have Americans that appreciate freedom of speech. Thank you for what you do every day.
Seems like more people are using like